Welcome to Public Affairs Roundtable, a discussion of current events in the nation and around the world and how they affect the people of Indiana. Here's your moderator, Larry Lough.
The Indiana legislature says casino gambling in Gary just might be okay. So the citizens of Gary are going to vote in a referendum this weekend to decide whether they would like it or whether they would not. Quite a bit of lobbying on both sides. Is casino gambling in Gary something that might be allowed, an economic savior, or merely a desperate attempt to revive a dead or dying town? Today on Public Affairs Roundtable, we'll look at the question of casino gambling in the Midwest. Our panelists are John Rouse, producer of this program, and a member of Ball State's Political Science Department; Jack Crawford, former Lake County prosecutor and now the man running the biggest numbers racket in Indiana as director of the Hoosier Lottery; Angie Cooksey from the Philosophy Department of Ball State; and Cecil Bohannon from the Economics Department and the College of Business at Ball State. Jack, we've had this discussion before about what is gambling and what is not gambling. The lottery is not gambling, is that right?
Well, it's not traditional gambling, Larry. We look at the lottery very differently than some people do. We distinguish it from casino gambling or sports betting or other forms of traditional gambling activity by several criteria. Number one, there's no skill involved in lottery participation. It is pure chance. You don't pitch your skill or wits against that of the casino or the house, which you see in normal casino-type gambling. It has to be a game based entirely on chance. Secondly, the payout for lottery players is much smaller than casino gambling. Some gambling operations advertise paying out 90-95% on their games. We are quite open with the public and tell people we only pay about 50% of the money wagered for lottery tickets are paid back to the players. So there isn't the kind of action that gamblers refer to that attracts them, in some cases addicts people to gambling. It's not present in lotteries.
So a low payout game that doesn't give the citizens much and that requires no skill.
Well, it gives the citizens all types of things. It gives them a lot of fun, a lot of entertainment. It doesn't give them
then what you're arguing
addiction.
is that entertainment is in no way addictive.
That's correct.
Relative to, let's say, the big casino games. They give, quote, better payouts.
There have been no studies that I know of, Cecil, that have shown that there's any connection between lottery participation and compulsive or addictive gambling.
But better payoffs and games that require less skill have less addictive qualities to them.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
Cecil, you look at a business like this, would promise perhaps 45,000 jobs in Gary. Gary, a city that is hurting, that is looking for this for economic revitalization. Would you think casino gambling, with perhaps its billions of dollars of revenue, its millions of visitors, would it be a boon for Gary?
I don't think it's going to hurt Gary, but I don't think it's any panacea for Gary. I think you've got sort of a middle ground. Look at the pros. The pros side of casino gambling in Gary is somewhere from 15 to 45,000 jobs, economic development, and some kind of tax relief. The con side is that there's going to be increased congestion, increased crime, increased tax, so to speak, on public services that are already overstrained in the city, and the potential that the poor might be hurt. It seems to me, if you look at it soberly and you consider it from a more sanguine perspective, what you're going to find is that if Gary can handle it right, and I think this is the important question, if they can handle it right and get a big cut of the gains that are associated with that, they can probably, quote, buy off the public service problem, in the sense they can hire enough policemen, build enough roads, do the things necessary to make life, reasonable for the citizens of Gary, and take care of the problems that would be associated with a lot of tourists coming into town. However, after that all gets said and done, what's Gary left with? You're left with maybe 15 to 20,000 fairly low-paying jobs. Now, that's not going to be a harbinger for everyone in Gary becoming wealthy overnight. It's not going to save the city in the sense that it's going to double everyone's standard of living. It's not going to be, shall we say, a boon in the sense of being, a golden cow that everyone in Gary can fall off from. But I'd say 15 to 20,000 jobs at $18 to $20,000 each is better than nothing. So in that sense, it would be a shot in the arm for the city.
John, it's been a political decision that gambling, that lotteries are going to be policy in Indiana. We've looked at it, whether it be entertainment, whether it be a revenue producer, that the legislature's decided, and a statewide referendum, that gambling, that lotteries are good public policy.
Yeah, I guess I'm a conservative, but I just think it's lousy public policy. Just awful, because the politicians, both national politicians and our state politicians, they just don't have the courage to raise taxes. I think also we have to look at the mix of problems that you have in Gary. And on this program, we've talked about the issue of racism, and I think we have to look at the concentration of the black population there. And so I think, as Cecil said, gambling may be the only game in town, but there are so many other problems that have to be dealt with in terms of Gary. And I'm thinking in terms of, first of all, I think this is lousy public policy, that our politicians really don't want to deal with the issues. And I think one of the things that is a very serious concern to our society is the issue of racism. So if we deal with these kinds of things, as well as allowing this gambling, casino gambling, the lottery, whatever, I think if we would deal with those problems, this wouldn't be so bad, but we don't deal with the real crucial issues in society.
Angie, I guess some people would say it's a sad commentary that we have to turn to gambling to help save a city like Gary. There seems to be an ethical question here.
Well, there does. And what the ethical question seems to boil down to is what price are we morally willing to pay to support some interest in Gary in this way? And I have to concur with John. It seems as though there could be better ways that we could be employing to raise money for that city, for the interest that it wants to pursue. Whether we like it or not, the kind of subtle messages that are sent by policymaking in conjunction with condoning the lottery is that it's okay to go ahead and spend $1 or spend $2 or spend $5 or 10 or 20, which is a substantial amount if you consider that your income may be no greater than $100 a week, $150 a week. If you're spending $5 or $10, you're into 10% of your weekly earnings. So I think that if we look at this problem insofar as proportion, someone in low income category in Gary spending $5, $10 on the lottery could be idealistically compared to that casino gambler who is spending the month's rent.
But Angie, that kind of neo-Puritanism is the same thing that drove Prohibition. It's the notion that the state can tell people what's good for them. No one wants to say vices are great. There are certain products, things like gambling, like cigarettes, like alcohol, that most of us have very ambivalent feelings about. On one hand, we recognize that there's problems with them. On the other hand, we love them.
And
on the other hand, we use them. And the question is, who's going to get the gain from that? Would you rather have criminals getting the gain for that or government getting the gain? Now, some people would see a little difference, but I'd rather have those funds going to the state.
Get off this puritanical stuff. That's a bunch of baloney. I mean, the issue is, will casino gambling bring a better quality of life to Gary, Indiana? And I'm not so sure that it will. You really got to argue the argument. You can't say neo-puritanical.
But wait a minute, John. If you and Angie are arguing,
good or not, and it's bad.
If you and Angie are arguing that this stuff ought to be illegal and that Jack shouldn't have a job doing what he's doing because this is bad public policy because somehow or another it's morally wrong, then that issue should be raised. The neo-Puritan issue should be raised. If you want to get back to the issue of what that's going to do for Gary, Indiana, I don't think anyone would say that gambling is going to be a panacea for Gary. I think what I said earlier, you're going to get 15,000 to 20,000 jobs that are reasonable, that aren't great. It's not going to save the city. It's not going to make it a paradise, but it's better than nothing. Same thing, I think Jack would agree with this. How much revenue are we getting from the lottery?
It's going to be a very small percentage of total state revenue, although we expect to generate probably gross sales in our first full year of operation of anywhere from $300 to $350 million, net revenue to the state of about $100 million. Still, that's a very small percentage, about 1 to 1.5% of total state revenues. So you're correct, Cecil, it's not a panacea for tax problems. It's not the answer to governmental funding difficulties.
Would casino gambling cut into lottery revenues, do you think? Or
No.
you have different people playing these?
We feel that there are different persons who gamble with casinos versus those who would want to purchase lottery tickets. The demographics in our surveys show us the average lottery player is not, Angie, as you implied, the lower income, destitute person who is spending their lunch money and dinner money on lottery tickets. The typical lottery player is a white male, aged 25 to 45, with an average annual income of $25,000 to $40,000. That's the market that we direct our advertising toward. That's the person we're trying to attract because they are our chief lottery purchaser. And we're not trying to appeal to the poorer segments of society because, quite frankly, they do not spend in greater amounts. They do not participate in the lottery in greater amounts in their population proportions.
But in making this kind of activity accessible to these people, we've certainly taken a step. to attracting all segments of our population to this kind of activity. In other words, we have moved gambling, if you will, taking chance, if we want to use that terminology in association with lottery. We've moved it out of the back room of the bars and out of the back room of the sandwich shops, and we've put it in our village pantries, in our speedways, and our video stores.
And we've put it in the commodities and futures market in downtown Chicago, too. I mean, if you want to talk about real high-stakes gambling, go and purchase some futures on grain and oats and barley.
Right, but you know as well as I do, that kind of a market is not nearly as accessible to the common man as the downtown
So
speedway.
the rich people get to do their little bit of gambling, but the average
man's not allowed to do it.
I just think that perhaps as a state, and maybe even as a society, we might want to quit talking out of both sides of our mouth, ethically and morally. On the one hand, we're fighting so very hard a battle against drugs. Drug-free Indiana, drug-free nation. We are wearing ribbons. We are wearing buttons. We are going and cashing in our red things for free items at stores because commerce and corporations are behind this drug-free push. So on the one hand, we are saying addiction is bad. On the other hand, we are making available activities which may not immediately lead to gambling addiction, but certainly flirt with the notion. I mean, it's the same kind of principle as saying social drinking is okay, alcoholism is bad, playing the lottery is okay, hardcore gambling is bad. But I would have to challenge on a theoretical base, what is the relationship between the low-scale gambling or taking chance in the lottery and the more high-powered chance that you take?
But the flip side of that, Angie, is if you really follow the logic of what you're saying, we want to have an unambiguous statement from the public sector, you really are calling for prohibition. And I don't think you really believe that. I don't think you really, in everything. In all the vices he talks about, alcohol, gambling, and everything else. And I don't think anyone advocates prohibition.
What do you call a drug-free workplace? I got in an envelope today with my check,
then we're back to the following
about
point.
drug-free workplace.
Then we're back to the following
to
point. Is it possible for the state to legislate morality? Maybe we have to go through this. I think maybe we have to go through the same thing we did in the 1920s again.
Program back to the casino thing. I think we got to ask the crucial questions. Number one of the arguments against casino gambling in Gary is that it destroys local businesses. Another point is it will bring more street and organized crime to Gary. Number three, it'll increase land values and taxes. And number four, it'll entice compulsive gamblers. Now, since this is the only game in town, and since we have to deal with reality, it seems to me that the leaders of our state, the politicians who don't want to deal with taxes, the politicians who don't want to deal with racism, they have to, if they're going to say that Gary is indeed going to have this casino gambling, that they have to deal with the issues of organized crime. It seems to me that there can be laws made to keep organized crime out of Gary if indeed the people want to keep organized crime out of Gary. But it seems to me that the politicians don't have the will, both in Gary and elsewhere, to keep organized crime out.
Well, one of the examples that has been drawn the parallel with respect to Gary is Atlantic City. Atlantic City did legalize, and you're absolutely right, John, there were problems associated with that in terms of organized crime and increased criminal predation in general. 2 points on that. One, there are ways, and I think Jack can maybe tell us about them being a former prosecutor, of being able to keep organized crime out of gambling kinds of games. Secondly, if you've got large numbers of tourists going into areas, it seems to me absolutely inevitable you're going to get some increase in crime. That's just inevitable. What you hope is that the revenues associated with that could get cut into the Gary services so that problem could be ameliorated. You hope that would be the case. The other thing I think that sort of can be raised with respect to a statewide interest with respect to gambling is that what we hope is we can be drawing revenue from places outside of the state of Indiana. That after all gets said and done, we can get people in Chicago to pay for some of our services here in Indiana, and most of us presumably would like that.
Atlantic City is probably not a great model, but in fact, the police department budget there has tripled since '76 when they initiated gambling in that city, but crime is still up. That they've added 41,000 jobs, but the welfare rolls are up. Mm-hmm. The nightly stays at the rescue mission are up tenfold. Is crime a real concern, you think, Jack? Somebody who's from Lake County, who is prosecuting in Lake County, would crime be a real concern of yours if casinos were to show up?
Well, let me change hats just a little bit, and I'm not going to make predictions based upon my past life as a prosecutor, but certainly you're correct, Larry, that anytime you have a casino operation, I've talked with the law enforcement authorities in Las Vegas and Reno and Atlantic City when I was a prosecutor, You're going to bring in a lot of petty crime, an awful lot of that. And one of the problems you face with regards to increased costs is with a transient population, people coming in for a week or a few days and then leaving, is the cost of processing criminal cases. You're bringing witnesses back from the entire world oftentimes, flying them back to your local jurisdictions to respond to a criminal case. And that's very costly.
Well, how much of the increase in crime is essentially crimes that are committed against the customers in the casinos, when we see that there's this threefold increase in crime in Atlantic City? And how much of it would be crime that would spread out in the rest of the community? Would anyone know the data on that?
I wouldn't want to hazard a guess on that. I don't know that.
My suspicion is a large portion of this, quote, increase in crime is the little old lady gets her purse snatched when she's on the bus going into Atlantic City. And that's unfortunate. I mean, no one likes that, but presumably she knows that there's a probability of that happening, just as she knows there's a probability of the slot machine paying off.
Well, how willing are we to do anything to make a buck, Cecil? I mean, why invite, or I don't know, my father used to call it tempting fate. Why should we tempt fate in this way? Why bring this operation
making a buck on it now.
Who is the someone? And if the someone
it's called
is
organized
just a
crime,
someone,
and presumably you've seen Godfather.
All right,
you know?
right. But listen,
you're familiar with gangster movies, Angie.
But we can't help but know that in bringing this operation more to the forefront, we're going to invite opportunities for more crime, for more congestion. I guess my question is an actuarial one. In terms of comparisons, will what we're going to do actually bring the returns that we hope for? Or, as you seem to intimate earlier, will we simply be maintaining, will we simply make enough revenue off of that to maintain a status quo? Or are we actually going to see a return on our investment, manpower-wise, money-wise?
Again, I don't see any great return. I see that, again, 15 to 20,000 jobs for people in the inner city of Gary is probably better than not having 15 to 20,000. And that's good. And that, well, because it's better to have some employment opportunities than have no employment opportunities. And then the question is the evils that are associated with the vice of gambling, if they get transformed, let's say, outside of organized crime and more into the public sector. There's problems with it being in the public sector. Yes, these ambivalent signals that you talk about, these the fact that it's legally sanctioned, in some sense there'll be more of it. But it seems to me, if you make it illegal, the problems simply rear their ugly head in another dimension in terms of increased gang violence, increased criminal enrichment, and things like that. So it's a trade-off. I see those things as more or less canceling one another out. So the bottom line is 15,000 jobs is good for Gary.
Yeah, and let me also emphasize that the establishment in Gary supports casino gambling. For example, in the legislature, Representative Earlene Rogers has been very supportive. Senator Carolyn Mosby has also been supportive. Mayor Tom Barnes in Gary is behind it. And also the Lake County government has donated $12,000 to the campaign to support it, as well as the Lake County Visitors Bureau donated $5,000. So $17,000 from local government to promote this. The fact that Mayor Barnes, the state senator, the state representative, the politicians are indeed for this issue as they see it perhaps the last game in town.
Mayor Barnes tends to look at this as, I don't see a better alternative. I don't see anyone else coming up with a better idea for economic revitalization of Gary. True or not?
It's a sad state of affairs.
Well, to change the subject a little bit and get into the politics of it, Gary churches, though, the black churches in Gary have been very much against this gambling.
Absolutely.
Which I think is sort of interesting, and I think might mitigate towards no overwhelming. I'll make a prediction. I bet there won't be an overwhelming victory for the referendum.
Yeah, but I think what really, if this is going to pass, the people who support it really have to deal with the arguments that the opposition is making.
Sure.
And if the majority, meaning the established politicians, don't deal with the hard issues of racism and crime and this kind of thing, gambling and casino gambling is not going to help all that much.
The way I look at it is the representatives from Gary should try to sell to people on they're going to get the biggest possible cut. I don't know if I quoted these quotes already, but $1 billion in gambling revenue would be the potential. Say a 10% tax on that, which would be equivalent to the New Jersey tax of 8.5%. Let's say we can get a 10%. That's about $100 million in state revenue to go one way or another. That's $1,000 per capita per citizen of Gary. If we roughly say there's 100,000 people in Gary, if they can get, let's say, 50 to 60%, that's $500 to $600 per capita per citizen in Gary. That could buy off a lot of the problems you're talking about, I would think. And then, again, we're left with that.
It
But
can't.
the problem is in New Jersey, from what I understand the Atlantic City experience, was Atlantic City didn't get much of the funds. It was Atlantic County and the state of New Jersey that got the big bonanza, and Atlantic City was left high and dry. And I think that's the important thing for people in Gary to recognize.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, well, what is the alternative? Those of you who say, no, we don't want casino, let's have an economic alternative. John says the politicians don't have the guts to raise taxes to do the things that need to be done in Lake County. John, are you saying that the legislature then ought to raise taxes for all of Indiana to help Lake County, to help Gary?
Yeah,
Just raise them in Lake County where they've suffered through the steel industry's depression?
The people of Indiana are undertaxed. And the infrastructure has to be dealt with, and in terms of education, health, roads, these things are undertaxed, and there needs to be more focus upon those kinds of services.
And the people in Knox County and Ohio County and Delaware County and Marion County ought to be paying those taxes to revitalize Gary.
I mean, that's the standard answer that people give, that if things are bad, we need to tax more, and I just don't think that's the case. I mean, there's no evidence to anything.
What's the alternative for Gary?
Look at something. Well, one's the lottery.
Casino gambling.
One's the casino gambling. One is to, I mean, I wouldn't say increased taxes in the state of Indiana are going to be a boon to economic development. If anything, decreased taxes have been a boon to economic development. I mean, the unemployment rate in Indiana is below the national average now, I think, to a large measure, because we've got a fairly reasonable tax structure here. And the tax rates aren't. I mean, I just totally disagree with that, John. I don't think taxes are too low in Indiana. I think
Jack,
anything, they're too high.
Jack, basically, the Hoosier Lottery is an example of the politicians being unwilling to tax. I mean, to come to the public and say, hey, we need a direct tax in terms of supporting the key things that we have to have in life, you know, good roads, good highways, good education, good health services. So isn't the Hoosier Lottery really a tax?
No, it's not a tax. It's purely voluntary. You don't have to pay it. You don't. First of all, it should be understood that not a dime, not 10 cents in tax money goes to pay my salary or to the administrative cost of the lottery. It is entirely self-sufficient. We are going to be paying off our loan from the state, which we have with interest. We have to pay that with interest back to the state of Indiana. Once that is paid off, we're in the black, and we take no state tax money whatsoever. If you don't like the lottery, you don't have to play the lottery, you don't have to support it. Well, I don't think it's, you say, a way just simply to build roads and so forth and to provide for programs that should be taxed to supply. I think it's a recognition somewhat by political leaders in our state that we have been spending in Indiana about $100 to $150 million a year in other state lotteries. We're losing that money that's going out of Indiana. Why not balance that out a little bit?
Yeah, well, that's like saying the gasoline tax is not a tax, though, because you don't have to buy gasoline.
Right.
But
you need gasoline to move around.
This is something of an entertainment tax. It's an entertainment tax, maybe,
Right,
but it's a user tax.
So you know,
much like a gasoline tax.
But you can, I think, entertainment and gasoline are two different things.
No, but your point is that it ends up being levied on a select group of the population, and avoids John's problem of having to raise taxes on everyone, which would be much less politically popular than to raise taxes on people by offering them a new product that presumably makes them happier in the absence of that. It's a much painless way to bring revenue. And so as such, I don't have any objection to it.
But what is the message we're sending in condoning the lottery?
To children.
I mean, well, but ultimately, let me ask you, gentlemen, is the lottery not representative of something for nothing? And I understand you're going to tell me there may be great entertainment and value in purchasing that ticket, that few moments of anticipation as you scratch off and see what it is you've won. Will you go on television? But in essence, aren't we just simply pouring money in and perhaps getting nothing back? Or worse than that, we win, which then whets our appetite to play yet again. Maybe we'll win
How's
again.
that different from miniature golf, though?
How's that different from addiction?
Why can't miniature golf become addictive? I suspect that it is in some cases.
That very well may be the case, but the state isn't rallying around miniature golf and hiring the Pointer Sisters to do commercials for it.
Well, now here's
not a bad idea.
Right on, Angie, right on.
Angie, we've had lotteries in this country for 17 years, and the Republic somehow has withstood this onslaught to our basic freedoms, and we're still surviving in this country. Now 70% of our people in this country live in states with lotteries, and we're managing to get through this terrible omen that has befallen the United States of America. We're going to make it through this. It's simply
but we may not be making it so well. I think that I've been reading and hearing lots about the degenerating moral demeanor of the youth of our country. I don't know.
Social fiber.
This has been talked about
just
since the time of Aristotle.
These are just rumors
The
that I've
thing that's
been
going to
hearing.
happen is it, let me finish, Cecil, is it if Atlantic City is Las Vegas East, Gary's going to be Las Vegas Midwest. And
Sure.
It's going to be right in the middle of the country, and everybody can pull off the highway and do their
Well, I
gambling.
their
will
hearts
agree
out.
with you on this, Angie and John, that the government should be required when they're running state lotteries to have some kind of truth in packaging. If I was going to advertise miniature golf as making one sexually virile and a wonderfully potent person, that could be something that wouldn't be acceptable because it's not truth in
Now,
packaging.
lotteries do that.
And that's right. And
Jack wants
I
to
think
say-
the measure, I like what the Arizona lottery says. The Arizona lottery simply says this is the most fun for the money. It doesn't make any illusions. I agree with you. To tell people that somehow or another go into the lottery and you'll get rich, therefore don't work and don't save and don't invest and do those normal things that in the long run will make people rich.
So the thing you're saying, if you're going to engage in gambling, do it with honesty.
That's right. That's right. And if the state's going to, quote, become the pusher, which I think is part of Angie's objection,
Right.
then maybe they shouldn't be a hard sell pusher.
Right. You should be
There
an
should be a
honest
soft
pusher.
There
shell
had to be
pusher.
certain standards. It wasn't in Illinois where they were running the commercials about people who were winning the lottery and
Your
if
ticket
not
out.
encouraging, tell
That's
them that
right.
you can
That's
quit,
right.
you can
No,
retire,
that's-
you don't have to work anymore. I suppose we're not going to see that kind of
You won't
promotional
see
gambling in
that.
Indiana.
You'll see a very stress on fun and entertainment here in Indiana, very similar to the state of Florida, which markets their lottery in that type of fashion, very different from the state of Massachusetts, which emphasizes the gambling aspects. Massachusetts has billboards that say, beat the mob, play the Massachusetts numbers game. They can accept that there. And here in Indiana, you're not going to see those kinds of advertisements. So it'll be a very upscale and very fun and entertaining pointed type of advertising.
I'm just not sure that without appropriate education along with the lottery and what that thing means and is, I don't know that it's the most conducive way to encourage responsibility and self-choice amongst the young people.
What about an ad that says for every dollar you get 50 cents back and a whole lot of fun?
Well, I might be able
Try
to buy
that.
off on
Right,
that.
that will make Angie happy and will probably sell your product.
How much do you get back if you play the lottery?
50% is returned back to the players. It is the worst odds in any type of gambling
And
activity.
casino gambling returns what,
95%. So
Now the revenue from the lottery goes to support the highways and
Build
education
Indiana
and that
Fund.
sort of thing?
85% to Build Indiana, 10% to the Teacher Retirement Fund, and 5% to the State Pension Employees Fund.
And then the legislature will have to determine just what it wants to do with any lottery that might come out of casinos, though Gary certainly would be in for a big chunk.
Sure, they'd have to be. And again, that's the thing I would argue, that we want Gary to be in. But I don't think this is going to be something that's going to help a citizen in Muncie that
All right.
much.
Thank you, John Rouse, Jack Crawford being with us, Angie Cooksey, Cecil Bohannon for a lively and spirited 30 minutes of discussion on casino gambling. I'm Larry Lough. Thank you for joining us.
Public Affairs Roundtable is produced in the studios of WIPB Channel 49 on the campus of Ball State University. The producer is John Rouse. Listener comments are welcome.